All right, bump this up. All right, guys, today we're talking about photo editing. If you're a photographer or you recently got into photography or taking pictures, you all know that the edit can potentially make or break a photo. And there's many editing styles. I'm sure your favorite creator, your favorite photographer has a certain editing style, so that when you see a picture from them, you can automatically see, oh, that's, you know, Peter McKinnon, that's North Borders, that's, you know, Pierre Lambert, that's whoever your favorite photographer is. And it's all based on the editing style. And here recently, I kind of changed mine up a little bit. I used to kind of like that high contrast, very vibrant kind of look. And here recently, I don't know if it's just because I haven't traveled much lately and I've just kind of been stuck here in the Houston streets, I decided to change my editing style up to a more darker, moody, mid-tone kind of vibe. And it's honestly brought some life back into my creative juices. It's made me want to go shoot more, and it's also made me look at things a bit differently because I'm already thinking how I'm gonna edit in post. So I look at the frame different, I look at the composition different, and I kind of understand what I can turn that photo into in post while I'm taking it. So not only have I been enjoying, you know, the new aspect of this editing style, it's also, you know, made me want to shoot more again. It's kind of pumped some juices back into that creative, you know, the creativity, whatever. But so I figured I've been having a lot of questions on, you know, how'd you edit that? Or I see you use the color grading tool in Lightroom. How do you do that? What do you do? So I figured run through a quick tutorial on a couple of my recent images and show you guys how I edit moody images to kind of get that dark mid-tone vibe. And yeah, hopefully you guys can learn a little bit. Hopefully you guys aren't going through the same lack of creativity that I was going through, but if you are, maybe this change in editing will maybe get you going again. So let's jump into Lightroom and let's check it out. All right, guys, so here's Lightroom. Got a couple of photos here that I recently taken. Figured we'll run through these and I'll kind of give you guys the ins and outs of what I do to get kind of this darker, moody vibe. So this will be the first one. This will be the second one. These are already edited. So as you can see, that's edited. That's the original. So we'll go ahead and reset. And we'll go ahead and work on this one. So there's two different ways that I like to do it. This first one is basically bringing down the exposure to a decent amount. We'll just start it off at negative 1.25, and then we'll go ahead and boost up the highlights, boost up the whites. Go ahead and turn the peaking on so we can kind of see where the peaking is. I don't want it to peak on his face. I don't mind a little peaking on other avenues of the photo, but definitely don't want it peaking on skin tones. So maybe bring it down just a little bit. No, the whites aren't. That's fine there. Bring up the shadows a bit. Bring down the blacks. Okay. And usually first things first is I'll go up here and I'll crop the image and auto it. That way everything's nice and level. I always try to make sure every photo I post is level. The auto ain't working on this one, so we'll just go ahead and do it manually ourselves. Looks like it just needs to be tweaked just a little bit. There, that's good. All right, so then I'll come down, we'll mess with the texture and clarity here in a minute, but then I'll come down and kind of boost my highlights on the tone curve, and then I'll drop down the shadows, and then I'll bring up the very end of the shadows, and that way it kind of flattens out the photo. So that way nothing's too shiny and bright. And I'll also do that with the highlights as well. Okay. Then come down to saturation. I'll usually, for this one, I'll take out all the reds, bring down the yellows a bit. I mean the oranges, bring down the yellows a tad bit. Bring down the greens, leave them nice and dark. The aquas, bring down the blues. There isn't many blues in this photo. And then I'll pull all the purple, all the magenta out. Then I'll go over to the luminance, maybe bring the green up just a little bit to make it stand out. You know what, I don't like how that's sitting, so I believe it needs to come over just a little bit more. Let's see. Better. Okay, and then I'll come down to the color grade. And now this, at the color grading portion, is kind of where I think you can really give it that grungy vibe. So the overall, the global, I like to bring that up into the greens. Not too much, as you can see, but just enough to where you're getting a little bit of green kind of tint. And then for the highlights, I typically like to go more on the aqua side. For the mid-tones, I'll go orange, just a little bit. Now we're not going to see, if you go too crazy, see it starts to blow out the orange in the image. So just a little bit, just the subtle details is what matters. Then we'll go over to the shadows, and for the shadows, I'll typically go blue, giving it a little bit of a blue tint. And then I'll come down and I'll just add a little bit of grain into the photo. So that way it's not super crystal clear. And then I'll come up, and now for this one, for the texture, let's see, bring up the texture a little bit. Then maybe bring down the clarity a tad. And then dehaze it just a little bit. Alright, just there. Let's see, there's before, there's after. So one thing I'd like to do is throw a mask. If you hit M on your keyboard, it'll bring up the linear mask. And I'll probably just come up like this, following the line of the escalator there. Just bring it down just a little bit. Kind of make the photo lead up into the subject. Bring down the highlights, bring down the shadows a little bit, bring down the whites and the blacks just enough to where it kind of leads up there. Maybe even come over and bring it up some. And that way it's kind of forcing the eye up to the subject, and I'll probably do the same coming down to the subject in that same kind of direction. And just a little bit of you don't need a whole lot. You don't want to make it look fake or artificial. You just kind of want to let your eyes lead down to the subject. So there you go. Get out of that, and I think that's looking pretty good. Let's see. Before, after. Before, after. I like it. So basically for this one, you just drop the exposure, make up for it on the highlights, the shadows, and the whites. Then you just drop the blacks, you adjust the tone curve, the saturation within the color, and the color grading, and then you end up with the Moody image as you see here. And it's pretty simple, minor adjustments. Don't be afraid of the tone curve, don't be afraid of the color grading, but just take it easy. A little bit goes a long way with the tone curve and with the shadows. Now, with the flattening of the blacks, you don't want to go too high, because then it starts to give your photo this strange kind of matte look that looks fake. So you just want to go up just enough to where it kind of flattens it out just a bit. It gives it that kind of grainy, old Moody look. So that's the first option. There's after edit, before edit. I like it. So now we'll move on to the second one. And this is another way of kind of adjusting to get the same results, just with a different process. So this is the edited version here. As you can see, I got the tone curve, all my adjustments made. We'll go ahead and reset it. So for this one, you want to do the opposite. You want to bring up the exposure. We'll go to 1.2. And I still got peaking on, so you see the sky is blown out. And then, so for the highlights, we're gonna go ahead and drop the highlights all the way out. We're gonna drop the whites all the way out. I'm gonna bring down the shadows just a tad bit. Bring down the blacks. Really kind of just smash out the image there. All right, then we're gonna go to the tone curve once again, give it a nice little S, bringing up the highlights, bringing down the shadows, flattening it out. Kind of the same process for this. Just flatten out the shadows, flatten out the highlights. And then you're kind of left with a little bit darker image, especially if there's a subject in the image. So definitely gonna have to mask him, maybe bring him up a little, bring him up a little bit. But for this one, we'll go ahead and go down to the color grade, saturation. Let's see, bring down the reds. We still want a little bit of red in the flowers, so just I'll leave a little bit in there. The oranges, bring those down a good bit. The yellows, same. Greens, bring it down. Aquas, blues, and I just remove all the, well, with this one, since there is flowers, I'll leave a little purple and a little magenta there. All right. So now, as far as the saturation of these colors go, I base it on the image itself. So if there are flowers, if there are some greenery, if there is skin tones, if you're taking pictures of a subject and that subject is a person, you want to make sure their skin tones are still intact, then you kind of got to adjust accordingly. So if there's a lot of green, you want to get that dark Moody green, so you'll bring it down and then maybe take your luminance down as well to the darker side of the green. That way it's just not exploding with vibrancy, because these Moody shots is really just pulling out the vibrant colors and kind of making it focus more on the subject, and then keeping it kind of grainy and moody in the background. So for this one, as you can see, I basically trimmed down all the colors, but the image itself, you could still see the greens, you could still see the oranges, you still know the colors there. So then we'll drop down to the color grading. For this one, it's pretty much the same. I'll take it up to the green, and as you can see right there, just the difference that green tint makes. I don't like green in my photos, I really don't, but when you throw the green on the global, it just, if you could see, here's without it, and then with it. So it just gives it that nice kind of old school filmy effect. Now, for the highlights, we'll drop them back over to the aquas. The mid-tones, we'll go orange. And for the shadows, we go blue once again. So as you can see, just by doing that, gives it kind of an old school filmy moody vibe. So let's just go ahead and before, after. We'll go ahead and turn that peaking off. So, come on peaking. Why the hell isn't it turning on? Technical difficulties. Maybe my computer's just acting a little slow here. Unreal. Alright, well, clipping is staying because doesn't want to turn off. Oh well. Okay. Alright, so then come down here, add a little bit of grain. I always add grain into the moody shots, the moody edits, just to give it that extra little bit of grunge that I'm going for. And then we'll come up, mess with the texture, bring up the texture a little bit because I want to see the raindrops on his umbrella there. Bring down the clarity just a tad, dehaze it just a little bit. All right, and then I'll go ahead and bring in a subject mask, see if it'll pick them up. Perfect. Sometimes it's hit or miss. Sometimes it picks them up perfectly and sometimes it's all over the place. So, and then for this guy, we'll just go ahead and bring up the exposure a little bit, bring up the highlights, bring up the shadows, the whites, and just crash the blacks just a little bit. Don't want them standing too much out. Just adjust it to where he has kind of just enough pop to stand out from the background. All right, then we'll go ahead and bring in a linear gradient here, come up from the floor right up to his feet, and we'll go ahead and drop that exposure, drop the highlights, drop the shadows, the whites, crush the old blacks, and maybe do the same coming off these buildings here, just a little bit, just to let the eyes flow down to the subject. Okay, I like that. And then get rid of the masks. And there we have it. So there's after edit, before edit, after edit. So those are my ways of doing it. I'm sure there's plenty of ways out there. These are two that I found to get the results that I'm looking for. Basically, one is just blowing out the overall exposure and then flattening out the highlights and the whites, and the other is basically the opposite. You bring down the exposure and open up the highlights, open up the whites. Just make sure you're not clipping too much on the areas that you want focused on, and you get results like this. So I mean, pretty simple. I noticed a big change in my editing when I started using the actual color grading tool. I never used it before. I always thought, well, what are those for? I don't need that. But once you start to want your images to have a certain look and a certain appeal and a certain tint and tone, you know, you definitely start jumping into those avenues. And you know, it's there for a reason. I was always just kind of nervous to use them. Not necessarily nervous, but I was, you know, I didn't know Lightroom very well. So just take some photos and play around with these adjustments, play around with, you know, taking out the colors, play around with the color wheels and the tone curves and everything else. And you know, come up with your own creative style, and hopefully it'll help you in the long run, not only advance your photography and your editing skills, but like it did for me, you know, it opened up my creativity and allowed me to get back on the streets and enjoy doing it. We all go through these lulls, and sometimes you just need a little change of pace, a little change of style, of whatever that helps you kind of get back into your zone again. And for some reason, just changing something as simple as changing my editing style really jumped me up there and got me back out there. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you'll dig into Lightroom and see what all it has to offer. If you guys have any other questions, or you know, want me to dive deeper into something, just let me know in the comments below. I read all the comments, I respond to all the comments. I appreciate all you guys who view the channel. I enjoy making these videos, so hopefully you enjoy watching them. So that's all I got for you today. If you don't already, definitely like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And I'll see you on the next one.